We are very lucky in California to be led by such able leaders. Thank you, Karla and Felicia. A note for those who came in late or who are getting your last sips of coffee before really engaging. We have at least 7 or 8 chairs up here in the front. And I know it's a little bit like a classroom or a place of worship or a wedding where nobody wants to sit in the front couple rows, but it's the best seat in the house. So I invite you to join us. As we talked about, we'll have breaks between each session, so as you need to go places, other places in the day, we would invite you to feel free to do so. So moving forward, and then getting into the program, we have next a set of remarks from 3 leaders from different parts of the world that have established their own leadership on water and climate. And I'll mention who we have, all 3 of them together, and then I'll ask the first speaker to come up. We have Mayor of Rotterdam, Netherlands, Ahmed Aboutaleb, who is leading efforts in Europe on this topic. We have Marcelo Mena Carrasco, who leads efforts at the World Bank on water and climate. And then lastly, Rodrigo Ravena, who is the Secretary for Green and the Environment in Brazil and based in Sao Paulo. So to start off our remarks, I'd invite the mayor to, and the 2 panelists and the other 2 speakers to come join us on the stage. Thank you. Mayor.
Good morning. Do you know where Rotterdam is? Ants? Great. I'm among friends. That's good. Do you know how lucky we are to have a lot of water? In my city, water is our friend, but it's also our enemy. When I listen to a lot of representatives all over the world talking about water and a shortage of water, then it's good to know that the city of Rotterdam is like this, in dikes, 6 meters, and then there, minus 6 meters, the cows and the houses. A very traditional place in the Netherlands. So the water is one of the most important challenges. When I wonder, when talking about the energy in the world, we are able to transport oil from Siberia to Germany. Do you have an idea how long that is? Thousands and thousands of miles. When it comes to water, we're not able to do so. To bring water from places where it is there to the places where it's not. So it's really interesting to rethink the way we think about water. And it's still a very cheap commodity. Do you have an idea in my household how much we pay a month for water that we need to do everything with? Do you have an idea? 29 euros, including taxes. When you compare that with the amount of money you pay here in California for water, it's a big difference. So there is a lot to do when it comes to water. Do you know that people in Singapore drink completely 100% recycled water from the sewage? Even the president was on the spot on television to show the citizens that she drinks water recycled from the sewage system. Israel is doing something similar. Namibia in Africa is doing something similar. So technology is also there to help us a lot. But water and water management are very fascinating things. I'm mayor now for 10 years, and making the city to escape when it comes to the danger of water, it seems to be not an issue that is only for the government. It's a collective effort. So when the governor of California is calling the whole citizens, 27 million, which is a bit more than the entire population of the Netherlands, well, 17 million, to be as one acting on this issue, that is the right call to do. It's about dealing with water in a variety of segments. That's why we're now, from our point of view in the city of Rotterdam, moving towards less government-driven motivation to deal with water, to engage citizens and businesses. Being adaptive is a very interesting issue. We're lucky, we're happy that the United Nations Global Institute for Climate Adaptation will be situated in Rotterdam, and Mr. Ban Ki-moon will be the chair. It's announced last week, and we will be happy to construct for that beautiful institute a floating building, you never know, to keep at least United Nations alive. But the working towards adaptation is not an issue that the city on its own can do. Why? In Rotterdam, 60% of the land is not owned by the city. 60% is owned by people like you and me and by businesses. So if we want to shape this land in a way that is adaptive to the future, then we need collaboration. Sometimes we need to motivate people. Sometimes we have to push people with some regulations. And sometimes we have to support people with some money, subsidies, things like that. So a variety of issues will be needed to work toward more adaptation. Mitigation is indeed very interesting, but that is only an issue of money. Having enough money, you might buy electric buses. But being adaptive is more complicated. It is spatial planning. It is where to live, where to work, how you deal with the public transport, how do you deal with the last mile when it comes to public transport, which is a very complicated thing to do. How much space do you give to the cars and how much space is for pedestrians and for bicycles? Then things become complicated. It's there where a massive approach where everyone is involved is needed to get really substance in the issue of adaptation. If you need any information about the city, please let us know. We have two colleagues sitting over there, and Henk Ovink, who's sitting here, knows a lot about the city of Rotterdam. Yesterday, there was the mayor of Copenhagen, a dear friend of mine, Jensen's, telling the city hall how important it is to have 300 kilometers of bicycle lanes, separated bicycle lanes in his city.
So very sorry.
I did. Yeah. But let me tell you that my city has 600 kilometers of bicycle lanes. Just for your imagination, that's just Rotterdam, through Paris, and somewhere in between Paris and Lyon. That is bicycle lanes in the city of Rotterdam. A tremendous amount of bicycles. The urgent need now is how to find enough space to park the bicycles. In the immediate vicinity of the central station, the train station, we have a location under the ground where we can install 8,000 bicycles. 8,000. Nevertheless, my friends in Utrecht have a bigger one, some 10,000 bicycles under the ground. So it's a new technology nowadays to deal with this two wheels. We see that the increase in e-bikes is rising dramatically, even in my household, and the other type of traditional bicycles is coming down. So another economy is going. The last remark I would like to make before entering any discussion here is, let me emphasize how important it is to put emphasis on working on climate issues. It's not only defending the most beautiful things we have, Mother Earth. To me, working on climate equals working on the new economy, equals new jobs. It was Napoleon in Europe, I hope you know the name, who ever said, for people like me in responsible positions, don't try to win the former war. The former war, you can only lose it. It's better to prepare for preventing the next one. And that's fascinating from a man who was his entire life engaged in wars. So the better lesson we can take is, indeed, it's for people like me very important to safeguard the jobs you have. But finally, that is a war you will lose. Instead of working in a transitional period, I don't know how long it takes, 10 years, 15 years, I don't know, but inevitable, we're moving towards the new economy. So leadership is to talk to people about how can we design that transition instead of safeguarding what we have, knowing that there will be a war that we lose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. clearly inspirational leadership from the Netherlands. Next, I'd invite Mr. Carrasco to come and share his thoughts.
Thank you, the mayor. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks to Henk for the invitation also. I just wanted to speak on two sides. Some of the concepts that I'll say on a personal level as a former minister. Some of the things I could still say, some of the struggles that I went through, just to put some reflection on how things have been changing. And then finally, what the World Bank is actually thinking about doing regarding climate change adaptation, and under which the opinion will be of the World Bank, right? So first off, the climate change issue, what happened in the last 4 years in Chile is that, essentially I didn't need to convince any other minister around that it was a real risk. Every single sector had been hit in some way and associated to water many times. For example, we had, in 2015, we have a landslide that stopped the mine production from going. It's the driest desert in the world that has had like maybe 10 millimeters of rain, and that flooded and huge landslide, huge issue that actually set back a city like Copiapó almost 200 years in terms of sanitation issue, because the sewage was everywhere and you didn't have drinking water, and it just became a huge mess. Last year, 2017, we had forest fires. Around 600,000 hectares were burned, and that was a real threat to many, many people. The red tide we had in 2016, as we see that goes with different hemispheres. People wanted to blame specific sectors overall, but it has to do with the fact that I have a warming world and a lot more nutrients around, and this caused the aquaculture industry to lose 30% of their production in a year because of this red tide. And Santiago also lost its water supply for a couple days in 2016, and essentially 2 days without water caused people to really think about how safe, something they already took for granted was going to be for the time, for the future. So nobody had to really explain to Chileans that there's a problem with climate change. 86% of Chileans think that climate change is real, and it's actually being seen. The Pew Research Institute put out a study that most Latin American countries see climate change as the biggest environmental threat, and also goes in Africa and in Asia. And just want to make another comment on the mining sector, for example. The mining sector is always seen to be like the bad guy, even though like in terms of the use of water, it's not the main user. But today, just this whole thing, water scarcity, the conflict with mining being in the north of Chile with a lot of water scarcity and at odds with the agricultural sector and people. Today, all new projects have to have desalination. It's inconceivable. And it goes from being the neighbor that actually took your water to maybe one that will supply water because they will make the extra effort to really have more water available. And, of course, a new project has to have renewable energy, and they're benefiting from really low energy costs that this is allowing them. And I just wanted to comment on the mine closure law. We had, for many times, a mine would have, would leave mine tailings, and nobody knew who it was, and it was a big risk, and it's a risk that's everywhere in the world. You have, even in Europe, you have very old mine tailings that nobody really owned, and they're hazardous. The fact that we made them account for the risk until the mine closure, for a certain period of time, it caused the financial sector to really look into how to fund these insurances. And the thing is, these huge mine tailings are not very insurable because it's just a huge risk that nobody really wants to insure. So that has caused the sector to really concentrate the mine tailings and reduce them to the minimum capacity possible so they could actually have a feasible thing. So this thing about like making this risk visible is really important, and it made that switch. The only thing, we didn't tell them you have to have substantially smaller mine tailings. Just that if you want to make the project viable, you're going to be forced to do this. Later on, I wanted to get, make some of this regulations to go through nutrient removal, so we wouldn't have all this nutrient overload that when the time came when you had the high temperature, we would have the algal bloom. But it was difficult, and I couldn't push it through. We did a lot of regulations, but I just couldn't push it through. And I just wanted, my reflection to my peers was, maybe you don't believe it, that this is a problem that we need to address, but the problem will creep up. It will exist. And, however regulations, they might be all met, the problem will persist. So it's like I heard in COP23, maybe you don't believe in climate change, but climate change does believe in you. And And so now, the other story of the water sanitation. I started my life in the water sanitation system in Chile, and here's a reflection on what that happened. You know, we didn't want to make water too expensive 20 years ago with the water treatment, because essentially you're dumping water in the river, and to sanitate it, it increases the cost around 30 to 40%. So, you know, some people would be held back in doing that because it'll make water more expensive. And they didn't do a good job in the odor control of the sludge, and that caused a huge problem with the neighbors. So the whole sanitation effort was a little bit undermined. And what the solution was, well, let's take it to the landfill. And the landfill also caused problems with the neighbors. And now finally, you know, after exhausting the bad choices, they are actually doing a good sludge treatment, getting energy out of it. And the sludge is actually being able to be used to stop desertification, which is actually encroaching upon Santiago. The water turbidity issue I was telling you about, you know, the Aguas Andinas now has set up redundancy in supply. They say, you know, we will have redundancy in supply, but that doesn't account for the fact that we will have less water in the future altogether. So the you know, better efficiencies overall is the way to do it. And just final reflections, we can't deny climate change in our zoning, and so so we have done different regulations that account and allow regions to enforce and ask climate risk assessments to be done in new projects when they're going to be placed somewhere in the different region to account for this risk. And finally, just going to what the World Bank is thinking about this whole process is, first off, you know, we have a lot of private sector adaptation that's not being really evaluated. If you look at the mitigation side of climate finance, we have maybe a 10-to-1 leveraging of private sector mitigation funding, $300 billion in renewable energy investments, compared to 30 by the multilateral development banks, 10-to-1 leveraging. But in the adaptation realm, it's way worse. It's 1 to 20. So essentially, it's only 5% of private sector is accounting for the private sector investments. One way is to be able to transfer those costs. Private sector is looking into a way to them it is a risk. Aguas Andinas today is being sued almost $8 billion because they didn't have water for 2 days. That's more than the money that the company cost. And the guys are saying, well, you know, I would do these investments, but I just need to transfer those costs to somebody. Somebody has to pay for this. And it's true. You have to have the real cost be reflecting what things cost. Water isn't free. The infrastructure to set it up isn't free. There's a lot of ideological things associated to it, but definitely you could solve and account for the lower income communities that will have to pay a little bit more for water and with subsidized in that regard. The World Bank is in the middle of a climate adaptation strategy development. We want to do better in adaptation. Last year we did 32% of our funding was climate related, and almost half of that was adaptation. So we are getting better at this, and we need to understand how to get better, and we will be launching an adaptation strategy by COP24. We're also part of the Global Commission of Adaptation, which is it's a Netherlands-led initiative that will be launched also in October. And I do think as the 1.5 degree report comes up, we will be doing more about adaptation. And it doesn't mean we're giving up at all. The mitigation needs to be done. We need to enhance ambition. But the thing is, even at 1.5 degree warming, it will be a riskier today, as we see, you know, half of the East Coast people really not knowing if they're going to get home tomorrow because of a pending hurricane. So the thing is, it's here. We got to address it. And the link between poverty and climate change is indivisible. We have to face one to also solve the other. And if we fail at either of them, we will fail altogether. Thank you so much.
One of the things that's so powerful about these global convenings is just how much you learn. And so from the perspective of Chile, just the diversity of climate threats that you've experienced is a learning lesson for me. And then also just the unanimity of recognition in Chile, and it sounds like other parts of the global south, that climate change is real and it's here. The mayor talked about the complexity of really trying to figure out adaptation. And then, of course, you shared from the World Bank, there's sort of growing private investment, growing investment in adaptation, but it's not where it needs to be. So third and lastly, we'll hear from a leader not too far away from Chile in Sao Paulo, who, of course, dealt with grave water threats very recently. So I invite you to come forward, Mr. Ravena.
Hi, everyone. I don't know. I try to speak a kind of English. I think no one here speaks Portuguese, so I try to speak in English. I don't know if you know São Paulo. São Paulo is a 12 million people city. And we grow through 3 main rivers that now is polluted. And we're trying to organize the city towards sustainable growing. We have a very large city, and we have rivers all over the city. They are mostly polluted, and we have 5.4 million water connections and 4.3 million sewage connections. So we have some sewage launched directly in the rivers. So the city developed 3 main strategies to try to be resilient. The first one is to control the growth of the city. We, by law, not always the best way to do, but by law try to make the city grows with centrality, the concept of centrality and concept of making together housing, working, and mobility. Why? To get better use of the natural resources. We try to find how much rainforest we have in a city of 12 million people. 30% of the land of the city is still rainforest. So that was mapped last year. And we're trying to develop a system that can make it intact and grow. Why? Because the rainforest in our system is the places where the water is, how can I say that in English? It's well, we try to grow the areas with the rainforest. So, as the mayor said, we have mainly 80% of these areas are not public; they are private. So we start to another way to bring these people to conserve these areas with what we call the environmental quota, that we give the people that owns the areas that the water can flow a percentile how I can say that quota, yeah, a quota to build more than it established to build in another place. So they changed the area with the green to another area that he can, with centrality, with all the meanings that prevent and give resources, we can direct the growth of the city, okay? And we start to understand how the city works. We still have rural area in São Paulo. We have about 18% of the south of the area of São Paulo. They are still farmers, and they are not treated like farmers. They are treated like city, and they are rural. So we started to look at these areas as preservation areas and use the community to preserve the resources in these areas. So the city is thinking, we cannot only by law establish the conditions of the resilience. We have to bring the community with us. We have to have people understanding that we no longer can work with the average rain, the average dryness. We can start to use and think about the city in the streams. We just passed through 4 years of dryness, and to this dryness, we start to rethinking how to bring water to the city, we cannot bring water from miles and miles away. We have too many losses, and we're trying to grow in the city new buildings, new constructions that preserve the water in the area, that can still have rain and sewage treatment, rainwater treatment to use in the buildings. The new buildings have to have the ambiental quota to be built, to be authorized to be built. And I think the most important thing regards to resilience is not that the public government or the government should do, and it's necessarily by people. We have to have all the citizens of the city knowing that we don't have the ability, the money, and the capability to prevent the dryness or the cess or the flows, and we have to control the growth of the city with the population participating and having and knowing that if we are not together, we are not a community, we are not looking for the city and the rounds, and we cannot be resilient, and we cannot have water for 12, 15 billion in 2 or 3 years. It's too many people, too many problems, too short money. And with the participation of the citizens and the private sector, I think São Paulo could give an example. We are trying to put all together water and transportation and mobility and building with a plan for the developing of the city that conduces to resilience. Sorry for my English, but I think that should be an idea what we are trying to do.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ravena. Two key points that I take away from your presentation. The first is just the growing complexity of adaptation as our cities grow. They're, obviously a global phenomenon toward urbanization. And as we have larger and larger populations in our cities that depend on water resources, how do we adapt? And then your other point that government cannot do it alone. Adaptation cannot be a centrally planned governmental activity. You have to figure out ways to incentivize the private sector, connect with people. So it really infuses all of the economy and culture. So I think this was an excellent beginning panel for the day, reflecting the threats and opportunities from around the world. So I'd ask our audience to thank our panelists. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah. We wanted to make sure as we begin our water pavilion that we recognize the original inhabitants of the lands that we meet in, and those are the Ohlone peoples. So we're very thankful to have a tribal leader here today, Charlene, to join us and share words of inspiration with our group as we tackle these very complex problems of water. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Charlene Nijmeh, and I'm the chairwoman of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe of the San Francisco Bay Area. Horshetuhi akoit makwadib. Good day and welcome to our land. Where we stand now was once part of Makumu, San Francisco Bay, but before it was filled to create the city blocks we now stand on. Not far from here, up Mission Street, is the village of Silitingtak. In this area, this is called Yelamu. Our direct ancestors and villages are to the east of here, across the bay, and we recognize this very specific place we gather here today. In our ancestral village and tribes in the East Bay were connected to Ramatika, the region our people call the San Francisco Peninsula, meaning the Western place, through networks of trade, intermarriage, and cultural bonds for millennia. We also acknowledge that not far from where we stand is Mission Dolores, where our people suffered great pain and injustice as the Spanish forcibly removed our people from our homes and attempted to change our world. While many of our people perished, the efforts to eradicate our culture and us have clearly failed. And this is because of the power that comes from our culture, the strength of our ancestors, and our belief in our purpose, which is to safeguard and protect our natural resources for our future generations. We indigenous people are connected to our land and water in a spiritual way that is hard to explain to non-natives. These precious resources not only feed our bodies, but feed our souls and nourish our souls. So when you poison our water, you poison our people. This is why at the forefront of every environmental battle, you find indigenous people. That is why we are here today, to talk and share and explore ways to safeguard our most precious resources. This planet is Mother Earth to us all. Not just to us indigenous people. We are here together on the same raft, navigating an ocean of uncertainty. If we do not all work together, I fear we will all end up smashed upon the rocks. In the famous words of Sitting Bull, let us put our minds together and see what life we can make for our children. Thank you and blessings to you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing those words. And I would just note with encouragement that there are indigenous leaders from around the world participating in the Global Climate Action Summit this week. And so I think it's an important reminder to us all to ensure that original inhabitants of the lands that we live in are leaders in the solutions that we have to find to climate change. So thank you for being here. We're going to do something a little bit high-tech for you folks who downloaded the app. I'm told that we have a I don't want to call it a pop quiz, I guess a pop poll on the app. So if you have downloaded the app and can bring it up on your phone, we have a question which is essentially what topics that we've started to address are you most excited about? The idea being, I think, in real time will help shape some of the questions that we emphasize during the day. So extra credit if you're one of the people who provides us answers to this poll. And I should mention, and some of you can't see this, but we have an excellent visual illustrator here that is helping us really capture the ideas for the day in a graphical format. So we'll be sure to capture that as the day progresses and then share that more broadly over the internet. So thank you for being here. We're going to jump right into the next panel, which is an excellent one featuring a lot of different leaders. So why don't I ask the panelists to come up and join me on stage as I introduce them. And actually, I get to pass the baton to Regina to do the job of introducing the panel and facilitating this discussion. Welcome, Regina.
Hi, good morning, everybody. We're gonna do something different today. This is the information to action section now that we're going into. And I want to first tell you what we're gonna be discussing here, and then we're gonna get into where everybody is going to participate. This morning we're looking for 3 objectives for information to action. And first we wanna gather examples of how we can accelerate information into action, how we can actually move quicker into making decisions with information into our communities. And so that's one of our first goals. Secondly, we want to show innovations. We want to walk out of this session in 2 hours showing those innovations. And guess where we're going to get that from? The speakers, but also all of you. So glad you could join us because you're on. You are now participating, and we really look for your action. Thirdly, we want to highlight examples from this meeting so we can take back with us. We can take back from wherever we all traveled from and work within. So we want to have those examples ready. Just if anybody's new to the session and you didn't get to hear anything earlier, just to let you know a few housekeeping notes. The restrooms, there's 4 restrooms right down the hallway. There's more past the gallery if you need them. So we're gonna start this session. I'm gonna ask Meredith Lee from she's Executive Director of the Western Big Data Innovation Hub to come up and join me so we can start with our questions that we're gonna ask all you. But I also, while she's coming up here, could everybody stand up and meet your neighbor. Please introduce yourself for just a minute. All right. And as you guys are introducing yourselves, please come forward, fill the seats in front. Those of you who are in the back, come on up in front. We need to fill the seats in front, please. All right. Thanks for meeting your neighbors. Come on up front, please. Fill up the seats, and we're going to start. There's so much knowledge in this room. We definitely want you guys to network, but we want you to come up front and fill the seats. I opened Pandora's box, didn't I? Come on up front. Yeah, we want everybody to come up front. Okay, if everyone can take a seat. And we're going to start the activity. If everyone could take their seats, thank you. Meredith is also going to introduce, if you notice there's something going on the side of the room. I don't know if all of you can see, but there's a special activity that Meredith's going to introduce here in just a minute. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Regina. Please, I know there's standing room only. I'm in heels, so I know how painful it can be all the way in the back. There are seats up here, and you can see all of the beautiful graphic facilitation if you're up here. If you have an empty seat by you, if you could just quickly raise your hand so the people standing room all the way in the back can see. Come on down. We don't bite. We have 15 minutes to hear from this virtual and in-person fireside discussion, the different stories, so don't be shy. Come on down. So does everybody have a card that looks like this? If our I heard a resounding no. So if our volunteers could pass out these cards, and there are enough pens to share with the neighbor that you just met.
They're coming down the aisle now.
Corinne and others are passing those out. We have 2 questions to start off the information to action session, and I know our speakers and panelists will touch upon some of this, so we'll try not to steal their thunder too much, but we wanted to hear from all of you. The first question that you'll see on the card is, what are our community success stories? Where has information been effectively used to drive action? And we've, by design, only given you a couple of inches of space to write your story, so we encourage you to be concise. We will ask folks to pass the cards to your left at the end of this session, so we'll continue to capture some of those stories on the art boards here. But for the sake of hearing from all of you, does anybody have a story to start that they'd like to share? And we have microphone runners as well. I believe Carol is here in the audience to come to you with a microphone. Who would like to start our storytelling session and share a little bit about how information has been used effectively to drive action, locally, globally? Anything goes. I can't see all the way in the back if you're raising your hand, so please flag for Carol.
I know this is not a group of shy people. I just couldn't get you to stop talking a minute ago.
Well, Regina, while some people are writing, I know you have some stories to share. Maybe you could start us off with one.
Story. I do a lot of work all over the state, and one of the stories I can share is really recent. Through information, a community down south named Ojai, California, near Los Angeles, just north of Los Angeles, has been undergoing a lot of climate change impacts. They've had a catastrophic fire called the Thomas Fire. Some of you may have heard about it last December. It actually happened in our wet season, and it surrounded the community on 3.5 sides. It's also had fire or climate impacts this summer of 115-degree heat, which broke every record by about 7 degrees. They've lost crop damage and other things. They're also, their water supply is dwindling. They have no imported water from outside of their watershed. So from information, the community, which had been in the past very separated over these issues, is now coming together, putting together plans to not only look at water security, but also climate impacts, vulnerabilities. They are actually looking at how to increase in-stream flows for fisheries, and they're doing this together. And so they did just put together a document on how the nexus between stream flows and water reliability works, and that's through all the water agencies. So it's a success story I wanted to put out there.
Absolutely. Any other stories looking at information to drive action? We have one up here, and if you could say your name and where you're from, that would be great.
Hello, everyone. I'm Edouard Boinet. I work for the International Network of Basin Organization, based in Paris, France. And I would like to talk about how information is important for action. As we all know, the first step to solve any problem is recognizing there is one. And in order to do that, you need good data and good information. That's not easy to do because everywhere we tend to organize our administrative units by theme. Some in charge of agriculture, other in charge of power and energy, other in charge of water resources. And to get a good integrated water resource management, you actually need all these ones to work together. And when we first started to see very clearly, without even data, that there was a problem with water pollution and water quantity, for the developed countries, it was back in the 60s and 70s, what the emerging countries are facing now. We saw orange river, we saw black rivers that were that way, not because they had some fun algae blooms, but because they were just heavily polluted. And that's at this time that in France we've created a Ministry of Environment, and the first minister called his own ministry the Ministry of Impossible Affairs, meaning that he had to try and build compromise with other ministries that have very conflicting interests. I mean, trying to produce food with heavy entrance of pesticides and fertilizer, obviously goes against some of the imperatives that we find for water resource management. And in order to try and get a better resource management, you had monitoring networks that were put in place, and more importantly, water information systems. And these water information systems were based not at the scale of the city or the region or the province or the state, but at basin level, meaning the natural entity of a river or a lake and the groundwater that are attached to that. This really helped to get all of the stakeholders that are either using water or impacting water around the table so that they share information and that you get a common joint understanding of what the problem is. We're coming back to the first question. To solve a problem, you need to recognize there is one. And it's way easier to push actions from farmers, from people from the hydropower sector, when they are sharing the diagnosis with you. So these water information systems built at basin level are one of the key solutions that we find in France.
Great, thanks. And I think the governance model will pay you later for laying that groundwork. I like this story. I think Stephanie has captured the Ministry of Impossible Affairs for everyone to see here. And you've actually also, think you laid the groundwork for our second corollary question. And I think there's naturally going to be some interplay between these. Regina and I were brainstorming what would be the two questions to kick this off. And it was really about stories and stories about people. So who are the necessary partners, the people, the organizations that we need to have at the table for building and maintaining connectivity between that information to action pipeline? So partners, do we have some hands in the back? And Carol, the microphone runner.
Hi, I'm not sure if this is working.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Karine Mandelbaum. I work with the DiCaprio Foundation. I have a story about partnerships. Back in 2008, California was moving towards the peak of another drought, and it was also coinciding with the Great Recession. And in Los Angeles, the second largest county in the country with nearly 10 million people, we were seeing the highest levels of unemployment, particularly for young people, people coming out of high school, entering college age. And we were looking for ways to train and employ these people in water resilience. And so we worked with several partners, pulling together workforce, training leaders, pulling together schools, community colleges, high schools. We brought together union leaders, and we developed a training, and we started reaching out to our utilities, to our conservancies, to residents, and we trained and employed 250 young people in xeriscaping, smart irrigation, native landscaping, and we deployed these folks throughout the region and found on the backside that with about $1 million of public funds, we could create 13 to 16 full-time jobs for these young people per year. And for every dollar spent, $2 would be generated within the economy. So it was this great job growth opportunity as well as economic stimulus.
We have another hand up here. Thanks, Corinne.
Thank you. I'm from Atlanta, and we have a flooding problem in Peoplestown. And then the then Mayor Reid came and said, I will find a sustainable solution to this. And from that statement and community learning about advancing green infrastructure to address flooding problem. That led the city, Department of Watershed Management, partnering with so many other groups to develop what is now called the Southeast Green Infrastructure Initiative. As a result of that, Peoplestown, Mechanicsville in downtown Atlanta, we have the longest permeable pavers in the whole world. And what that means is that we're using a sustainable solution to infiltrate the storm water in a place that we have flooding. We still have flooding, but it's limited now. That came about with using the information. That is one hand. Then on the other hand, at the MPUV, where we have Vine City and Vine City and what's the other one, Yomi? Anyway, the point I'm making is in another place also, the Eco Action and its partners were able to work to, which led to the development of 29 conceptual plants that will capture 40 million gallons of stormwater. That came about through collaboration and cooperation. And that is a big deal in moving forward to address flooding issues in the Metro Atlanta.
Great, thank you. We have a hand here.
Hello, my name is Jacob Vind. I'm a Danish Consul General, and I run a Water Technology Alliance here in the US. And I want to challenge you a little bit because I think, we're all about information. Definitely everything needs to be data-based and science-based, but I would say from a Danish standpoint, what drives action is not information, it's inclusion. So of course you need information, but that, in my experience, creates awareness, but really to drive community-based action, you need inclusion. And just to give one specific example, so in Copenhagen, we're battling a lot with flooding, and we have climate change mitigation plans. And the problem is, once you have an information meeting, you only get the vocal minority, and I know that's the case here in the US as well. So what the municipality of Copenhagen have done is they've started having parties. And it's not a joke, they actually have started having parties because when they throw a party, have pancakes and balloons, the kids and their families come out, and instead of having the vocal minority being active and critical and creating obstacles, you get these positive resources that are actually engaging in this project, whatever it is, creating a new stormwater retention park or whatever you're doing that will impact the neighborhood. But it's just a huge difference if you include people, you can get that positive resource on board with a project like that. So that's, at least in my experience, is in the end what drives action is inclusion.
That's a great point. And one of the interesting evolutions of this module was actually it started out as science to action, and we tried to be more inclusive and renamed to information, realizing that there's all sorts of different sources, not just science, not just data, that come into play when you're trying to generate community engagement and action. So we have another potential title for the next pavilion as Inclusion to Action. I think there are a number of themes throughout the 2 days that will underscore that point as well. Yes, a follow-up, please.
Just a quick follow-up to what he just said. In the Bay Area, there's a lot of programs with environmental education. And what we find by doing that is that the kids go out, they have a project that has meaning. For example, gathering water samples to understand the acidification of the water in the Bay Area. And the families get engaged and they learn about water and the importance of water and what we're doing to our water. And those families happen to be leaders in business, in government, and they can take that back, and they have taken it back into their places of work. So, maybe not always throwing parties, but engaging children sometimes can be very effective ways of engaging leaders who otherwise turned a blind eye.
Absolutely. Megan Smith, who is one of our chief technology officers for the U.S., said, never underestimate the middle school factor. Oh, and sorry, what was your name and organization? Or?
Sorry, it's Mary Finnegan. I'm with the Morgan Family Foundation.
Thanks, Mary.
Phoebe Seaton with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Just to add one more echo, stand up, is the interplay between community-based information and broad information, and how those two can interact and develop partnerships and successes. One of the projects that we've worked on with several other people in the room is working with community-based organizations, communities in most vulnerable to groundwater contamination and depletion in California, and working with those communities to generate more information in long-term sustainability of the community, at the same time as generating research around what possible solutions are kind of for regional solutions. And so using both kind of statewide data to show in California how close some of the most vulnerable communities are to larger water systems that can provide sustainable sources of water, but kind of as importantly and more importantly, working in partnership with the communities most impacted, where there's a myth that a lot of times lower income communities don't want to be part of water systems and don't want to pay monthly fees, and seeing that when communities have the information they need, are always in favor of having sustainable sources and limiting their water use for long-term sustainability. And so seeing that interplay of kind of broad-based, research-based information, but then again, I would say more importantly, the community-based data around interest in being part of a sustainable water solution has created some really successful local successes in securing safe drinking water and statewide successes in developing legislation around sustainable water sources and infrastructure investments.
Great, thank you. We have this very big clock countdown because I know there's a lot of great content. We will have another interactive session at the end to wrap up the 2 hours, so don't worry, but we have room for maybe one more story. Somebody who's been waiting.
Good morning. My name is Marisa. I work for the International Community Foundation, and I just want to build upon some of the comments about inclusion, because we know that that's important, but how do you do it? So while information is definitely important, I think some questions can be helpful, and I think those questions can be, as we're making decisions, who benefits from the decisions? What are the impacts that those decisions are going to make? And who is at the table? So my grandmother has a saying that she didn't coin, but she used it all the time, and it's don't do anything about me without me. And I think that that's a really good guideline that's helped serve me. And I think in addition to information, asking questions is very important.
Absolutely.
Great.
You couldn't have said it better.
So to summarize kind of some of the feedback here, we have inclusion. Thank you for bringing up inclusion. Whether it be in parties, there's also a term called passive education, or incidental education, which a lot of you probably know about. And so it's really important for people to learn these things when they don't even know they're learning. And I think your grandmother's table, we're all at the table of climate and water. So inclusion seems to be an overriding theme. Any other themes that you're pulling out from this discussion?
That's what we hired Stephanie to do over here very beautifully. Plus, we have the recording to think about. But I think the partnerships across different sectors was highlighted throughout many of the comments. So it's not just industry, it's not just government or academia and universities or just nonprofits. It's the interplay between all of those different stakeholders and how we might work together, which is my day job, so I'm partial to that theme. But I think having this table and this discussion and realizing this is the Water Pavilion and the Global Climate Action Summit is just one step in a long journey that we're road mapping together. It's a great theme. And I would just say for the reminder, I know we don't have a break between the session, but in trying to capture some of that, you may have seen as you were walking in by the coffee, a map to place a sticker on where you're based and where your collaborators are based. And so that's a nod to these important partnerships and how significant it is to meet your neighbor and continue meeting your neighbor's neighbor throughout the 2 days.
We'd really like you, before you leave, we have a guard, and you're not going to be able to leave until you put that sticker. And they're really mean, too. We got the meanest person in the Bay Area. So if you could, we really want you to be represented and also your partners represented on that map. So thanks for taking the time. I think with that, thanks, Meredith, for helping me with the interactive version number 1. So we're going to move into our presentations. We have 2 presentations for you and then a panel, just to be clear. And I think that I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Ken McClune. Come on up. And so Ken, I asked her, so we're not going to do long. You can please look on the Whova app and read the bios. But I was talking to Ken about why'd you come here? And he said, you know, I came here because I was sitting in back of my computer for 15 years doing modeling, and I really needed to do something different and reach the world in a different way. And he's going to tell you more about that, and I think has some great stories, and he's a very lively personality. So thanks.
I better
thanks
be
for
lively
coming,
then.
Ken. So you can be right here. Thank you.
Thank you. I really like the idea. I really like the idea of a policy party. And I think we'll throw one in Boulder. And I want to deeply thank everyone for, you know, like, why am I here? You know, I appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak about this work that I really love. This was work done by a lot of people, and I'm just a representative trying to speak to it. How do I make this slide go forward? So before we go forward, I just wanted to say that my background, I have about 25 years ago, I started working on climate change issues as a grad student, and then further with more science. I am thoroughly a geek. I am a physical scientist by training, by nature. But about 15 years ago, I said to myself, you know, I'm really tired of sitting here watching things get worse. I'm just sitting behind the computer, and you know, we can hone these messages, these models more, but that's not where that's not what needs to happen. I need to get out there in the world. So now, 10 years ago, I did that, and I was very fortunate to work for ISET, the Institute for Social and Environmental Transition in Boulder. We also have offices in Hanoi and in Delhi, but very fortunate to work with them and the Rockefeller Foundation on the Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network. So, next, please. So this very dim image here is about climate change and water. So according to the last IPCC report, 93% of the impacts of climate change will be felt in the water sector. Okay, 93%. Next, just hit forward. Next slide, please. So a couple examples of what that means. In 2003, European heat wave. You can see this red mark right over Europe. Now, that heat wave was exacerbated, made worse by the lack of soil moisture. That spring, they didn't have a very strong rainstorms, and so it was very dry. And because of this heat wave, the lack of soil moisture, the heat wave killed 70,000 people. Okay. Now, this wasn't ultimately seen to be climate change. They couldn't attribute it to climate change. But model projections say this will become more frequent. Similarly, the Amazon basin. So if you think about the Amazon basin and the tropical forest of the Amazon basin, they're entirely dependent on recirculating rain. So transpiration into rain, which feeds the rest of the forest. So one of the elements, one of the concerns about deforestation in Brazil is that as they cut back forests, it will turn it into a savanna, and it will not be able to be regrown as a forest because the transpiration will be gone. So these water issues that are very different, but climate change will affect. Next slide, please. So I wanted to do my bona fides on being a scientist and geekdom because I'm going to get all soft and fuzzy now. So to do resilience work as a water manager or someone with a physical science background, you have to get in touch with your inner social scientist. And so I'm going to talk about data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. And mainly what I want to point out is that each step in this process is a social process. Each step to go from data to information required some social interaction. It requires a social understanding of what data is and how that fits in information. Now, most of us in the physical sciences were socialized into thinking of it in a certain way. Other people have not been. They're socialized to think of it in a different way. And then going from information to knowledge is yet another social process. What will really blow your mind is that data itself is actually also a social product, because what we decide to measure, what we choose to measure, is also socialized. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is our resilience network framework. The main point here is the centerpiece, the shared learning, our shared learning dialogues. And that's where we bring in information to the local communities in a way where we try to integrate scientific knowledge with local knowledge. So key to this process is an understanding of the local narrative, understanding of the local story. People understand their world, and they interact with their world with their stories. And so climate change is just another story, and it's a story coming in from someplace else. International development has a long history of knowledge delivery. So knowledge from New York gets airdropped over Hanoi, and it doesn't work, surprise, surprise. So key to addressing that issue is a shared learning dialogues where we try to integrate different stories in a way that serves the local needs. Next slide, please. Maybe. Okay, I just wanted to say where we work. This is one of the, so I'm going to give a couple examples of where we've been able to do this, and they're very different. One is in Gorakhpur in India, and the other is in Da Nang in Vietnam. And they're very different contexts. They have very different stories. They see the world very differently. But through a process of understanding what the local story is and integrating information, we have two very successful projects. So next slide, please. This is Gorakhpur. This is a ward in Gorakhpur called Mahewa Ward. And in this ward, they had a terrible flooding problem. And they had continual flooding and mud. And the challenge there was that whenever they put in drains, that's great, that would clear up the flooding, but within a couple of years, it would be flooding again. The drains would be stuffed with all sorts of things, and it would all be backed up. So going in with a different approach and understanding the context, we found out that the drainage problem wasn't the lack of drains, but was the lack of a social institution. So it was a completely different way of looking at it. It was like, well, yeah, we need drains, but in order to maintain the drains, we need people here who are like engaged around drains and understand drains, and it integrates into their story, and they know what they need to do with them. The next example, next slide, please, is out of Da Nang. Da Nang and Quang Nam provinces. And so here are, okay, so talk about silos between sectors. Silos within government sectors. So silos between the health department, silos between the water department, silos between the agriculture department, and all of these. In Da Nang, we worked with several different departments to try to get on page. Now this was work that we did with, initially with the Army Corps of Engineers. So we were able to bring the Army Corps of Engineers back to Da Nang, this time to do something positive. And what we were able to do is get them, the different departments talking to each other. Now they're very technical in Vietnam. They're very technical in Vietnam. So what their interest was is they wanted a hard product that they could come out with and say, yes, we've got this model. So we worked with them to create a model to integrate their different models. Each department had 3 different models, to integrate their different models into one. So for them, they came out with a really valuable product, a model they could use to understand the river basin, understand the flooding and drainage issues. For us, we came out with a very important product, which was these departments were talking to each other. You know, when they sat down, they had different words for things, they had different things, different understandings, and in trying to work through creating this model together, they wound up talking to each other and creating the same language. And now we've expanded it into the next province next door. So this is a cross-border issue, which adds new dimensions. Next slide, please. Now, Tui, who's going to follow me up here on stage, had said in a phone call earlier that she was going to show some wonderful photos of New Zealand. No pressure, but it turns out she didn't. So anyway, I was going to rub in some pictures from Boulder. This is one of the photos from Boulder, and I love the lenticular cloud over the mountains. And next slide. And I thank you.
Thanks, Ken, so much. It's hard to make sure that we stop you because we would love you to keep going. So great introduction for Tui. If you want to come up as our next speaker. And Tui Shortland, she came all the way from New Zealand. I'm going to do my best to say where the town that she's from, and she's going to tell me how I do. Let's see how I do. Wagari? Pretty close, New Zealand. So thanks for coming. When I asked her, why'd you come all the way over here? What are you looking for? And she said, I really just want to meet everyone here and really drive action further into the community. So I'm going to let her explain the rest. And thanks so much, Tui, for coming.
Thank you, Regina, for the introduction. Thank you also to the Indigenous leaders, for the blessings today and the welcome, and the Indigenous communities upon which we stand today. And thank you to the hosts and everyone for bringing all these wonderful people together. Yes, I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Unfortunately, I couldn't bring photos. I had to rush to Wellington before my trip here, but I'm from Northland, which is 2 hours north of Auckland. Most people know where Auckland is. And I'm from lowland forest wetland people on my father's side. So very early on I was chosen. My name Tui is a bird. So it's a medium-sized bird that plants the small seeds in the forest. And when I was born, the bird was slowly disappearing. So my community named me Tui as a type of a cultural indicator and put me on this path of environmental management, which I'm very thankful for. So around 10 years ago, I was initiated into working on environmental work for my people. My first work was to set up a mapping database around our sacred places, and my other work was to write our environmental policies. So following on from that, I developed our cultural health indicators for our freshwater ecosystems, and worked a lot with our communities. It was sort of cut my teeth on how to develop these models around our traditional wisdoms that can be inform decisions at the local government level. And we had around 60 cultural indicators that were developed and monitored by our fisher communities and our medicine people. And it still continues today to inform community resilience. And since we've been doing this for around 10 years, we've been able to use the information that we've gathered to show the types of changes that we've observed through climate change. And some of those around access to water,
So in my community, we have around 50,000 hectares of land, and the majority of that is still in ancestral hands. So much of it is unreticulated. We're still managing our aquifers and our springs and surface water in traditional ways. And so we're able to learn from ways in which we manage water over 100 years ago. Riparian planting, for example, is one method that we know we've used for over 100 years. We've been in our territories for around 400 years. So yeah, that's one of the programs that I have developed and we've been able to apply in other Indigenous communities. My earlier work also around climate change has been in regards to marine mammals, not so much linked to water, but more salt water. But over 20 years, we've had a small Indigenous team working on whale research and traditional knowledge, and we have researched over 500 whales to date in the last 20 years, and we contribute to knowledge around their cause of death, their stomachs, what they've got in their tummies, what they're eating, their organ health, and various other types of information, which again we have seen really major changes in relation to climate and the health of our oceans. So I just wanted to give a little plug around that. I live currently in Whangarei. As Regina said, Whangarei is the gathering place of sperm whales. That's what that means. And so probably again, a reason why I do a lot of this work. The sperm whale in our creation stories is known to be the brother to a major tree called the Kauri tree. It's one of our grandfather trees. It's really, really big. I'm not sure if many of you may have watched the movie Moana with the kids, the Disney movie. It sort of demonstrates the importance of ocean navigation to Polynesian peoples. And the trees that we carve our ocean voyaging waka from, which we still do, is called the Kauri tree. And so in many of our forests you have 100 to 200-year-old trees, 500-year-old trees, and in some of our forests we have around 2,000-year-old trees. And they're quite significant, yes. And around 10 years ago we discovered a water mould which is impacting fatally on some of our trees. So for 10 years, I've been a part of the joint management program. A lot of my climate change work is now moving a lot into biosecurity because of the change in the movement of species and the risks in communities. So we established for the Kauri dieback, it's a water mould dieback type, Phytophthora. We set up a joint management program with Indigenous peoples represented in the governance alongside the top level ministries, and within the operations planning and intelligence research field. And through that we also developed the cultural indicator program. So around 80 species were identified as living close to or around and having synergistic relationships from a cultural perspective with the tree. And we developed a monitoring framework as well, so that Indigenous communities can pilot the framework, which we're currently doing, and assess the health of healthy forests. So from an Indigenous perspective, forest to us is called ngahere, and ngahere means the binding together of all the species within the forest, each being as important as the other. So we look at everything, which is a lot, but our intention for that program is so that we might find a fungi or an orchid that might show susceptibility, or it might show resilience, and give us some information about how this water mould, how it is behaving within our forests. And in terms of the solutions from that work, we're also using traditional medicine knowledge. So how can we build the resilience of our forests by using the plant knowledge of our Indigenous medicine people? So yeah, that's sort of in 10 minutes summing up my 10 years of work in this space. A lot of that has helped this is the tools that we have established in regards to engaging with scientists, with NGOs and government, so that we can ensure that Indigenous communities are engaged appropriately. We can have access and benefit sharing agreements. We can establish biocultural community protocols and ensure that we are working within free, prior and informed consent principles. So with that, I'm really thankful to have the opportunity to share today with you all, and I look forward to getting to know you all better in the future. Kia ora.
Okay, thanks, Tui. I think it's a really important conversation. There was a conversation last evening. I'm sure there'll be conversations today and tomorrow. Just who needs to be at the table and how important it is that we set the table with all the knowledge that we have and what we know now. And it's so important. 400 years of different methods on how to manage water in our watersheds. We don't want to disregard that. And I think almost every session in the Water Pavilion has Indigenous speakers and presenters. So it's pretty fantastic. Thanks for everybody who did the work on this. So now we're going to transition into our panel, and if I could have all the panelists come up as well as our moderator, come on up to the stage. And while they're coming up, I just want to introduce our moderator. And if I had a full 10 minutes to do it, I would love to. Martha Davis. Yes. Those of you who don't know Martha Davis, please grab her at the break, talk with her. She's really important in California and definitely in the West and the United States water policy. She worked half the time, most of her career, with the Model Lake Committee and drove resounding changes there, as well as worked with a water agency and really led the way of creating a different paradigm shift for water agencies. Now she's retired, but she does wonderful things like this as well as contributes endlessly. And I think you might be learning how to crochet in your spare time. But anyway, thanks, Martha, for being the moderator.
And thank you for inviting me. I got to tell you, I was really inspired by the early session. And I understand, Regina, after the panel, we'll go into another session of participation. And you made me think about how challenging climate change is at a community level, because it so impacts our hopes and fears for our families and our communities. And it exposes a lot of the cracks where we really don't share an understanding of the information of what's going on. And it made me think of Leonard Cohen's poem, which I'm blanking on, but the key line is, it's the cracks where the lights shine through. And I think a lot of what we're trying to do here in terms of the looking at how are people using information to drive action, how are we building those partnerships, that's where the light shines through. That's where the path is going to be, to figure out how do we build these inclusive responses to extraordinary challenges facing our community. So I have a fabulous panel. I'm going to grab my information. I'm going to sit down with them. Our first speaker is going to be Sarah Law, Vice President of Global Initiatives, CDP. Next will be Jan Casson, sitting here on my right, the Water Initiatives Director for Forest Trends. In the middle is Cristina Rumbaitas, did I say that right? Del Rio, South Asia Regional Adaptation Lead with DFID. And I'm sorry to say that Suzanne Schmier, Senior Lecturer, IEH Delft Institute for the Water Education, had a family emergency, but she has given me her notes, which I've been looking at this morning. And so I'm just going to do a quick stand-in for her to try to deliver her main messages. So with that, we're going to get started with Sarah Law. I was going to say Suzanne. And I think we're going to have to try and keep everybody at about 6 minutes, something like that, so we can keep moving. We have 8 now. Okay, we have more time. So with that, I'm going to give the...
Thank you, Martha. And good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you for this conversation about one of the most important resources in our lives. CDP is a data organization that works with the biggest companies, investors, and cities around the world on disclosure. So I will throw some boring numbers at you, but what I wanted to do was to start with a story. And it's a story about a TED Talk that the late Hans Rosling, a Swedish statistician, who had a lifelong pledge to try and ensure that people understood the importance of information and therefore to help eradicate ignorance from the world. But he gave a TED Talk a number of years ago, and he started by placing a sheet of music on a projector and said to the audience, isn't this piece of, can't you hear it, this piece of Mozart, isn't it divine? And the audience stared at him mutely. Because the point he was trying to make is that that sheet of music to the uninitiated, to those who are not trained in music, they can't hear it. And in the same way, those who aren't trained in data and statistics, they find it very difficult to see the magic of those numbers, dots and dashes coming off the page. So that's the type of work that then I do, and enabling and empowering others that we work with to do, to try and tell the story behind the data. So let me start with some of those numbers. So CDP's been running a program around the disclosure of information about water for about 8 years now. It's an annual thing. And in 2017, which is the latest complete set of data that I can speak to, we had about 2,000 companies from around the world representing about 20 trillion in market cap, which for those of us, and I'm included, who aren't financially minded, is a lot of money. So we had about 2,000 companies disclosing information about how they are measuring water because they recognize that it's a critical component to how they do their business. It both presents opportunities and massive risks. Of those companies, what we saw was an increasing awareness that they can't go it alone, that they can't treat it as a resource that is renewable without some serious work at the river basin level and engaging in a multi-stakeholder approach. We had hundreds of companies report on a data point that said that ecosystem vulnerability was a significant driver of risk for their business. Now, when I look at that, I go, okay, well, what does that mean? But in the CDP data collection world, to call something, and in the business world, to call something a significant driver of risk is basically saying this is something that could critically impact how we do our business, whether we can even continue to do our business going forward. So that's sort of the boring statistical number one. The second one is that, well, what are these companies therefore then doing? What we saw reported to us was $23.4 billion worth of projects. That's over spread across 1,000 projects, spread across 91 countries, where we have these companies recognizing that they need to invest in projects, whether it is desalination, whether it is improving irrigation to deal with, to help combat the effects of drought, working very closely in their communities. So there's a correlation between what we see, the boring data side of things, that really is driving action. So when we take this data in CDP, what we then do is two things. We come up with some interesting trends that we can see based on the aggregation of all of this information. And then we also look at the very important qualitative information that companies disclose to us to pick out the great stories, the great use cases to show that collaboration really does work, engagement does work to help solve the water problem. So one of the trends that we picked up in the information that these 2,000 odd companies disclosed to us is that they recognize that there's a need just to disclose, but what we saw was that disclosure was very rapidly leading to better setting of targets and goals. So what we found was companies who only disclosed for the first time, which is a really scary thing for them to do, about 50% of them would come out with information about company-wide goals and targets relating to how they deal with water. Fast forward to companies who are disclosing in their second year, we start seeing that number trend up towards 60% of companies. By the time they get to the third year, we're starting to see 66% of companies coming out with these goals. So that's in the life cycle of a company and long-term strategic planning. That's really quite remarkable. That very quick change. So that's trend number one I wanted to share with you. And then the second one is, as I said to you, there are a ton of companies who see that water and water risk presents massive risks to how they do their business. And we ask them questions about, okay, what are you going to do about it? And the top 5 things that companies are reporting to us that they're doing, and I'm trying not to get them wrong by actually reading them out to you. The 5 things that they're doing in response to these risks. Number 1, they're investing in infrastructure in the communities that they operate in. Number 2, they're engaging with the communities who share the water resources and the risks should it be polluted and lost. Number 3, they're working at restoration at the river basin level. Number 4, they're engaging with other stakeholders in the river basin level. And this one's particularly important because when business speaks to other business, there's a certain clout involved that, you know, the average NGO or the community organization fails to be able to open that door. So that's really important. And then the 5th one, recognizing the impacts of physical risks to operations. They are developing flood emergency plans. So those are the trends that we're seeing, and you know what strikes me out of that is 2 out of the 5 deal specifically with engagement. Businesses recognise that they've got to look beyond their own operating footprint in order to solve a problem that they are a contributor to, but they can't possibly solve all on their own. So, like I said, we do 2 things. We come up with some interesting trends, and then the other thing is we pick out some great stories. So one of the stories that I'd like to share with you is the work that's being done by a company called Danone, a French multinational company, the world's largest dairy producer. In 2017, it reported that about $1 million of its finished products were ruined because of pollution coming through the water streams in some of their operations in Brazil. Now, they're a $1 trillion company. Sure, $1 million doesn't appear much, but you know, when the margins are what they are, it's actually pretty significant, and it's symptomatic of something that could be a systemic and long-term problem. They also disclosed to us in the same year that they were investing $59 million in projects working with their suppliers to ensure that they shore up this, the access to raw materials that are so critical to their business, whether it's milk supplies in the sub-Sahara or fruit supplies in China. And in 2018, they started on a new piece of, a new project that works with their 140,000 farmers around the world, mainly smallholder farmers, around regenerative agriculture, recognizing that the work that they can do to pioneer, provide the tools and the financing to help restore water and health to the soil ultimately is going to lead to better yields, security, and frankly, healthier soil retains water. So that's critical to what they've been able to do. So I could have, 20 other stories to tell you, but I think my 8 minutes are up, so I'm going to hand the mic back over. Thanks very much.
Thank you for coming, and I appreciate the invitation from the sponsors, and I think it's been a great, inspiring morning so far. I'm Jan Casson from Forest Trends. At Forest Trends, we really work to mainstream nature-based solutions or natural solutions to climate, water, and development, so really bringing together ecosystems, water, climate, and people. I think I'll spend my time telling a story about some of our work in Peru, which I think is a great kind of illustration and brings together a lot of the really great points that were brought up this morning. So I'll just launch in. Hopefully I'll keep the time. So we work in Lima, Peru, which is the second largest desert city in the world after Cairo. They have impacts of climate change already from melting of their glaciers, and water is a scarce commodity and very important for the 10 million plus residents of the city, as well as the rural communities in the upper watersheds that are the source of water for, much of the source of water for Lima. There's a significant dry season deficit for the city, so there's a rainy season with a lot of water. Much of that used to be captured and stored in glaciers, and that's no longer exactly the case. So there's a dry season deficit. And the water utility in Lima is a large traditional water utility. They're very familiar with cross-basin transfers, with desalination plants, with large water storage structures, and those are the solutions that they usually look to. But there's also a general recognition that watershed protection, that maintaining the native grasslands and the wetlands in the upper watershed can be very important part of ensuring clean water supplies for the city of Lima. But one of the challenges that everyone in the community there faces is that while there's a general understanding about the value of these nature-based solutions, it's very hard to translate that general understanding into things like cost-benefit analysis, to really quantifying the water benefits from, say, improving pasture management or other wetland protection or other interventions that might be done by the upper watershed communities. So one of the things that we did was really working on what kinds of information do the variety of decision makers need in order to decide to make investments into natural infrastructure. So the utility, Cerepal, they really need to know in a fairly quantified way how much dry season deficit can be made up by these natural infrastructure interventions. How much is it going to cost? How certain is it that those benefits will be delivered? The communities in the upper watershed want to know how these natural infrastructure interventions are going to affect their ability to make a living. How is it going to affect the livestock raising, the agricultural practices that they do? And importantly, what is the effect going to be on the local water supplies, which they rely on infiltration in the wetlands and the grasslands to provide spring water that they use for their water sources. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the system. It's really easy to quantify how the gray infrastructure is going to perform, but it's very difficult to quantify with the same level of confidence how the nature-based solutions are going to perform. So what we did was really use a model of what we call co-development of information and knowledge. So we brought together the rural communities, the traditional communities, the agricultural communities in the upper watershed, the engineers from the utility, hydrologists and economists, and we brought them together to develop conceptual models and estimations of performance of natural infrastructure together. So this was not something that hydrologists and economists went away and did calculations and came back and told everybody how it was going to work, but everybody really did develop the information together. So everybody understood the assumptions that lay behind the estimations. They understood the kinds of uncertainty in the predictions, and they really bought into the knowledge generation. One of the really interesting things that came out of that was the role of traditional knowledge. So a lot of the economists and hydrologists and the NGO community came into the effort thinking that wetland protection and improved pasture management, reducing the number of livestock and the intensity of grazing were going to be key to improving the health of the soils and improving infiltration and recharge of groundwater and ultimately the supply of water both in the upper watershed and downstream. But one of the things that was missing in that piece of Western science and information was the fact that there was this whole system of pre-Incan water harvesting techniques, infiltration canals that take water from streams during the very high flows in the wet season, direct them to naturally occurring wetlands, which are a source of infiltration and recharge springs for flow during the dry season, and also recharge groundwater and contribute to flows in surface water lower down, which supplies the city of Lima. So there's a whole system of these water harvesting techniques that work with the natural landscape, with the natural wetlands. And a lot of that knowledge had been lost over time, but enough of it remained that we could include those interventions in what we estimated the amount of dry season flow that would benefit from restoring that system. We also looked at the cost per unit increment of flow. And so what we were able to do was do a series of cost curves that showed how the green infrastructure or natural infrastructure interventions compared to a suite of gray traditional desaled cross basin transfers, which are very energy and greenhouse gas emission intensive. And we found that about a combination of green and gray infrastructure could deliver the dry season flows that were needed at about 18% lower cost than the gray infrastructure alone. And the green infrastructure interventions alone could provide as much dry season flow as the desalination plant that is being proposed. So both green and gray infrastructure are going to be needed to address water security and climate change. But this kind of information allowed the utility to commit to allocating a certain portion of their water user fees to upper watershed investments, so about $30 million just for upper watershed investments for water security, and about another $80 million for climate change adaptation, which could also be nature-based solutions. So the fact that the information was co-developed, everybody trusted the information, even though there were significant uncertainties in our ability to really estimate, in a quantified way, the exact flow benefits. I think one of the actual unexpected things that also came out of it for us was that the recapturing of traditional knowledge and the revaluing of that traditional knowledge, which had been lost. But these communities now are taking the forefront in rehabilitating and restoring these systems of infiltration, recharge, using local wetlands and springs. And that was something that we hadn't anticipated, but is really, I think, a clear benefit of this idea of inclusion and co-development of information for action.
Thank you. There we go. And our third speaker is Christina.
Thanks. So my name is Christina Rambaydas Del Rio. I lead a program called Action on Climate Today, which works with the governments of India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh to mainstream climate change resilience into sectoral policies, planning, and budgeting. And I'm going to draw a few examples from that to dispel 4 common myths that I hear repeatedly about why we can't take action on climate change within the water section. And the first argument that I always hear is we don't have enough data to take action. So we need to stop everything and do a study and collect data for the next 3 years, and then we'll move on from there. And I think that's just rubbish from my experience. There's a lot of data that is out there. It might be siloed in different places. So one example from where we've been working in the state of Bihar, the planning department, the agriculture department, and the water resources department all had automatic weather stations that they were collecting data from, but they weren't sharing data between them. And so the data sets were completely siloed, completely different formats, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was just a step that was missing in terms of sharing this data and collating it to build a much broader and more robust data set to work from. The other area of finding data and information, which has already been touched upon, has been talking to people, asking the communities, bringing in perception-based data and other forms of data and information from different stakeholders. And an example from that is we worked with the Bureau of Statistics in Nepal to do a perception-based data, which surveyed about 5,000 households in Nepal about climate change. And what do you think was the top climate threat that came out of that survey? Any guesses? Anyone who knows Nepal want to take a guess? Water? No. It was actually wind damage to houses, wind damage to crops. And that's interesting because there are actually no programs dealing with building resilience to wind damage
in Nepal. And so based on that information, the government is now looking at, okay, what do we do to create more wind-resistant housing, wind-resistant crops and cropping systems. So again, when you ask people, you get relevant information. The third sort of way of getting information that I've found to be quite successful is scenarios and doing scenario planning, where you bring in the best available climate information, the best available local information in these sorts of shared learning dialogues, which Ken mentioned earlier, and then look at, okay, what do we do if we're in this kind of a scenario, and what do we do if we're in that kind of scenario? And again, eliciting information through that. And then the last sort of form of information gathering that I've seen used really effectively is asking people about thresholds. Where do things start to break down? And this is from prior work with New York City in developing their adaptation plan. Mayor Bloomberg put together an infrastructure working group. And they used a thresholds-based approach where they started asking, Con Edison, the electric company, at what temperatures and wind speeds does the electrical grid start to break down? Engineers know exactly what those thresholds are. Moreover, starting to talk to the police department and emergency healthcare workers who said, hey, temperatures above 90 degrees at night is when we see all sorts of hell break loose on the streets and violence occurring. So you start to elicit, okay, what are these thresholds that we need to pay attention to and prepare for? The second myth that I hear all the time is, okay, maybe we know how we're climate vulnerable and maybe we know where our vulnerabilities lie, but we don't know what to do about it, right? We need to do some feasibility studies and spend, again, another 3 years and $1 million trying to figure out what to do. And again, this is a bit rubbish in my view, where the top thing you need to do is if you don't know what to do, you're not asking the right people. You're not asking those that are affected. You're not asking the community to really generate some of those solutions and that creativity. And this is a little bit of the tagline that we heard earlier about not about me, without me. So when you have a consultative process to try and elicit ideas, from my experience across multiple countries, you get a plethora of potential solutions. Now, we might not know what's most effective, what's most efficient, what's most equitable, but we're not going to know unless we try and experiment and learn and then start to see, as a relatively young field, what works best. So it's really about trying and learning. And then the last point on this, I'll say, when in doubt, employ the precautionary principle and protect your buffers, protect your ecosystems and all the nature-based solutions that we've been hearing about, whether that's protecting your wetlands and springs or implementing better demand management so you're using your water most efficiently. The third myth I hear a lot of the time is, okay, we know what to do, we've got some ideas, but the incentives are just too entrenched. The status quo is too hard to really change. And this is where I like the line about the cracks are where the light shines through. It's about finding those cracks, those policy spaces where things are already changing, where you can then build in a climate lens, whether it's a policy that's being redrafted. So for instance, right now we're working in Afghanistan, which has to redevelop its water management policy, and we're making sure that they're thinking about climate impacts in the course of that policy. And Afghanistan certainly has a lot of problems to deal with, but they realize that part of the insecurity is because the snowpack is drying up. And it's a primarily rain-fed agricultural economy, that the security threats are multiplied when that agriculture starts to dry up. And so looking for the space where reforms are already happening is often a more productive place to start. And working where there's political will, where there's momentum. And so I'll take an example from the Indian state of Odisha, where a new secretary of the water department came in and said, look, we have chronic flooding on the Mahanadi River Basin every year. Why can't we predict this?
And then engineers came up with 20 reasons why you can't predict it, because the upper watershed is in the neighboring state and they don't share data, because flood happens all the time, it's just part of life, like all sorts of reasons. And so what he did is he actually went outside of government and contracted with our support a bunch of academic modelers to develop a flood forecasting system, which is now being used to provide up to 72 hours of warning time of when flooding occurs, whereas before they had just about 7 or 8 hours to respond. And so sometimes you have to move outside of the systems to innovate and experiment and then incorporate it back into the system, which is what they're doing. And the last myth I hear about very briefly is that it costs too much. We can't finance this. And here again, I feel like that is a significant challenge, but you need to find ways of layering resources, whether it's bringing in some external resources like the Green Climate Fund or development funds, or private sector funding and CSR funding. But also looking at domestic budgets. So we've been doing a lot of work to analyze the climate relevance of domestic budgets and finding that actually a lot of what's already being funded is climate relevant. And can we mobilize that and reprioritize so that so that government budgets are being used to maximize climate benefits? And so I'll stop there, but just to say there's a lot of myths out there that people throw up to prevent action, and we really need to start finding the pathways and ways around that. So I'll stop there.
And I'm just going to channel very quickly my inner Suzanne. And she follows many of the themes that this panel has been talking about. As I was keeping notes, can't go it alone is one thing that Sarah, you started with, looking at the trends, understanding those risks in a way that really connect with directly, risks, make sure that word came out correctly, in terms of just how do you manage your day-to-day work and family life and be successful. You're doing it in a corporate sense. And certainly, Jan, what you were picking up in terms of the co-development and how important that is in terms of helping people being able to have a shared understanding of the problem, as well as what are the different options that you have available to deal with it, and popping some of the myths, getting at the fact that what we assume and what's really out there and what's happening on the ground may be two different things. And then, Christina, I love all of your popping these myths, because I think we've all heard them at one point or another in any community activity where we didn't have enough information and that was a reason not to go forward, or we didn't have the money, or there wasn't an incentive payment for what we wanted to do. And the idea of working with I like to call it the coalition of the willing, who are willing to take that step out on the limb and show how that information really can change the way we understand our options, which is critical to then being able to get unlocked from being frozen by the problem and really thinking about what these solutions really could be. So Suzanne was really focusing on science and how science and development of information plays a really critical role in helping people reshape their understanding of the challenges. But what I really liked, and she emphasized in her notes, was knowledge in general and knowledge about climate change in particular is not always taken into consideration when governing water resources and taking their decisions on their use, development, or protection. And she went forward with a couple of examples that showcase kind of different both problems and opportunities. One was from the Mekong River and the development of hydro dams. It was progressing very rapidly. It's a very conventional solution in our engineering thinking about how to develop water supplies and do flood management. But her point was, because these dams are being developed in a context where the information is not reflective of climate change, they're going to have much less water. The operations are going to be very different. And they haven't figured out yet how to connect those dots with this momentum on the solution that they've chosen with the reality of climate change and how it's going to impact how that solution really turns out. Another one relates to, I'm going to save the success story for the end, with South Africa and the Orange River Basin. And this is an example of where you have such diverse views and lack of cooperation. In this case, it was a drought that forced cooperation, where they had to actually, because of the human suffering, when that drought hit in Botswana in 2015, and it obviously the effects on the economy as well, but they really had to figure out some mechanism for sharing the water. So here's an example of external events having people find their humanity, as well as more creative solutions than just saying it's mine and you're not going to have any. So that's a really interesting example. And then the final one, which I think echoes the example that of having the party to develop information, relates to the Danube River Basin. And this is a case where knowledge about effects of climate change and how to address them in a transboundary setting with 19 riparian states really needed to be addressed through shared development of the information, and how successful that was in creating an adaptation strategy that people could buy into, because they were buying into the co-development of the information. So Suzanne very clearly echoes the themes, and she closed with what I almost think is almost a question mark, because she says, well, there are a number of facts related to science development. She thought there were three that were really critical. One was the type of science and how it is being communicated to decision makers. And I think there are two separate components to that, because the question really ends up being, who are we really talking to and who are we trying to convince, and what kind of science is going to be influential. The second point, which I think is actually a critical one in all of this that hasn't come up yet, is the receptiveness of policymakers to such scientific advice. There's been some interesting work done by Rand and others. How do you communicate information that decision makers really need to know in a context where they can hear it? And there's probably a lot to be said by this group about where does community action fit into helping our representatives understand what's so important here. And finally, the governance mechanisms in place and their effectiveness ensuring that science informs policy. And she closes by saying, it may be these governance mechanisms as being the most important, because how do you ensure that as people are making decisions, that this information is being taken into account? And I see my colleagues nodding in agreement. So with that, that's our panel discussion. Do you want us to take questions, or do you want to jump into your... Let's do questions. We actually have almost 8 minutes. Yay, panel. Thank you. Please, go ahead. Let's see if we can get... Again, I don't see you guys as being shy, so I'm curious, based on some of the lessons that you heard here, both in terms of success stories, but also where you were surprised by the outcome of something. Do any of you have a project where the information you heard today is going to make a difference? What have you heard from this panel that you would be able to take into some of the work that you're doing? I see a brave person in the back raising his hand.
Okay, I'll try again. Jacob, again, I've had the party comment before. This is also more common. Thank you so much. It's super interesting insights. What I just would add is, so we're talking about different costs for companies and governments and whatnot, and I would just say that bringing in the element of doing nothing is also an action, and there's also a cost element to that. And once again, trying to tie a knot to Denmark and climate change adaptation, we've integrated in these municipal plans to actually calculate the exact, well, it's always going to be a guess, of course, but the cost of doing nothing. And in terms of getting the attention of policymakers, it's quite interesting to slap them with, okay, so if you can keep going like this, this is what it's going to cost us. and then you have kind of a good platform to start talking about alternative solutions. So it's just to add to the really excellent comments that were made by the panel.
Here's a hand. We have some hands in front.
Hi, I'm Bevan Buchheister, and I work with the National Governors Association. So I work with most of the country's governors' water policy advisors. And what struck me about a lot of what you're talking about that's happening in different countries, the myths that, for non-action, that's the same things that I see on the state level and on our local municipal levels as well. So, I mean, it was really interesting that's happening in different countries, in Nepal and all these areas, and it's the same kind of things that lead to inaction here. I was also struck by the Lima, Peru example of comparing gray infrastructure with green infrastructure. The same thing is occurring in DC, and they were doing building gray infrastructure to capture stormwater overflows because the rivers there are under a federal dirty waters decree to clean them up, and they have a cap on pollution. So some of that information sharing on cost benefits would be really helpful, and I just didn't have the global aspect. I just look within our country. But I also have a question for the first speaker about how to get businesses to invest in infrastructure that's not only helping their own business, but it's helping the whole economy, because government water policy advisors, one of their biggest concerns is, how do we fund all this stuff that we know that we have to do, all this water infrastructure? We're at a critical point in water infrastructure in our country. It's really old. We're going to have to make all these new investments, and government just doesn't have enough money. So how do we get businesses to participate, to do something that won't only help their business, but will help the whole sector?
Sure, and that's a really excellent question, and I'm not going to pretend to give you an answer that applies to all. But what I can say is, when we see, one of the trends we saw as companies responding by saying that they need to invest in restoration projects and infrastructure projects at the river basin level, that to me signifies that they recognise that there's no sense that they are responsible for this slice of the pie only, therefore that's what they're only going to look at. There is a critical issue about a lack of funding worldwide for the projects that are necessary. I think the G20 has come out with an estimation that by 2035 we need multiple trillions of dollars of investment if we are to meet the goals set out in SDG 6 in relation to water. We're nowhere near that right now. But to see the trends where there's recognition that there are 1 + 1 can equal 5 if different stakeholders work together, I think that's pretty key. And the data that we're seeing from companies is increasing awareness of that. One additional thing I want to throw in there that I haven't talked about is, these large companies, they, for the longest of times, have been quite almost solely driven by the need to meet the short-term financial goals that they believe that our shareholders have. But we're starting to hear some very helpful messages from the investment community. And I'll point to the example of the letter published. There's an annual letter published by Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, which is one of the largest asset managers in the world. They basically own a slice of every single company that you could think of. Mr. Fink's letter from the beginning of this year stated that it's actually not acceptable for a company to not look at the long-term risks and opportunities that it may be exposed to in terms of its impact upon the environment and the environment's impact upon it. When companies start getting that type of messaging from people who really have leverage power, I think that's where the rubber will hit the road, and some of the other thinking that they've been doing, as shown through the analysis, will start to move from being this is a nice to do as opposed to a need to do.
It will be better like this. You spoke about political issues, and you spoke also of the Mekong rivers. So it's a pity that China and Myanmar are not full members of the Mekong River commissions, even if they are observers. But how to pass from this level of transboundary basins, big basins, to the local involvement of the stakeholders. At this moment, we are working with 3 countries in this basin, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos, to work at tributary levels of the Mekong, which some of them are also transboundaries. But the main issues is to be able to mobilize data. The majority of these countries do not have sufficient access to data. And after, to be able to pass this data to local communities and different stakeholders. And we try to create at these sub-basin levels basin committees, which may be also official ones in some legal framework of these countries, and to put around the same tables all the different partners, not only the ministries and administrative bodies, but also representative of local community, farmers, industrialists, the electricity companies, and others, to be able, on the basis of the diagnostic of the data available, to speak about what is the vision of the future of their sub-basin, and what are the priority actions to be taken. And this seems to work. And this is very important for mobilizing peoples, because clearly, even at this big basin like the Mekong, but other ones, in fact, all the actions are not at the state levels or transboundary level, but also to be taken by individuals, firms, farmers, and so on, because we do not succeed if they are not involved. What do you think about?
I think it's a wonderful closing comment. Regina, can I just do one lightning round, just one sentence each of their closing recommendation? You can. Name and your... Oh, yes.
But I may speak along? Okay. So I'm Jean-François Donzier from France. I'm the General Secretary of the Global Alliances for Water and Climate.
Thank you, sir.
So I guess just in closing, I would say what we see happening in the nature-based solutions space is really looking at the multiple benefits. And I come from the water perspective, but it's really the climate benefits, the health benefits, the economic benefits, development benefits. So I think by focusing on those multiple benefits, we can engage more of the stakeholders, more of the community, more of the people who will pay for these investments that we need.
I'm just going to do a shameless plug, if I might. We have a new publication out that specifically looks at using climate information for more climate-resilient water management. This was done in partnership with ICET that's out front, and we have basically a 10-step program for doing this. And if this is too heavy for you to take home, we have a 2-page version out there as well. So if you want to learn more about that, please pick that up or just talk to one of us. Wow, the last word, fantastic. One of the original intents of this panel was to draw together the nexus of climate actions and water actions. So I'd like to leave you with one trend that we've seen. Of the companies around the world who disclose to us that they're taking actions to deal with climate risk in their business, whether it's through adaptation or mitigation actions, 25% of those projects have an assumption of readily available water. So if that doesn't draw the nexus together, I don't know what does. And because I have the prerogative of the last word, I'd say that overall, I'm really optimistic. I think we can actually find these solutions. It doesn't take rocket science, but it does take a willing heart from everyone who's involved.
Okay, and nobody go anywhere. We have 2 more questions that we really want to hear from you. Yeah, we'll let you stretch, just don't go anywhere. So please feel free to stand up and stretch. Don't talk to your neighbor. No networking, no sharing of information, but please stretch. 2 more questions. Thank you, Martha. Back down. Thank you. We're just working on a mic problem. Oh, excuse me. Hello. Thank you. So I have Meredith Lee back up on stage with me, and we're going to walk through 2 more questions that we would like your feedback. And again, there's so much information in this room and so much shared experience. We'd like to hear from you. You can see the evolution of the graphic that Stephanie is working on, and that will be shared. So if you can come back in and sit down, and I'm going to hand this over to Meredith for the last 2 questions.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me in the back? Great. So we have a volunteer, Jenny, who is handing out your second card. For those of you who were here at the beginning of the session, you are pros at this. You know the card drill, and there are pens. If you're standing in the back, please come on back to the seats or shuffle around so people can see all of the great dialogue that just happened. From the steering committee standpoint, I guess we should have given them a break. After this, we have lightning talk pop-ups that Wade is going to try to MC, so that shall be interesting. So Jenny, where's Jenny? Jenny, if you could hand the cards out. Excellent. Everybody has the cards. Fantastic. So even though we have 20 minutes set aside for this exercise, I'm going to be ambitious, taking a cue from the panelists, and say, why can't we do this in 10, right? Okay, so the first question really underscores the education, the literacy, the fluency that might be needed to cut across different sectors. We've heard about many different stakeholders who need to be involved for community action. And so we're asking you for this third question, how might we help with data and information literacy? How might we help with the inclusion aspects so that all can be equal partners? Can anybody share from their experience anything you've done to help with fluency? I can tell you, having worked in federal government, academia, industry, and nonprofits, everybody has their own types of jargon and language and way of doing things, and there is a fluency in building a multi-sector team. We're asking you, what are some of your hacks or techniques that you've used to get that to happen? Yes. And please, again, introduce your name and where you're from.
I'm Caroline Staten, Sebastopol, California, and I'm involved in a nonprofit that organizes community convenings. And one thing that always helps is food. Bringing food and inviting people into conversation. Simple.
Absolutely. More pancakes, and I think it was balloons were suggested earlier.
We are hosting at UC Berkeley across the bridge a hackathon for the next 2 days, building on some of these themes, and free pizza with a sprinkling of energetic speakers and mentors often does the trick. What other techniques have we used to help build fluency across different stakeholder teams? Yes, from Atlanta again.
Yomi, Atlanta. Two things. One is when information is shared in a disempowering way, it does not lead to action. When it's shared in an empowering way, it generally leads to action. That means you are connecting to the values of the people you are working with. That helps. The second thing related to that is that we don't get the action we want if we don't have a just relationship with the people you are working with. That is the basic, one of the basic things. You have to invest time in developing a just and transformational relationship in order to lead to the action that you want, that we all want for climate change. We don't get it overnight, and we will not get it overnight until we invest into that, into those two things. Just relationship and transformational change. All these things will take time, but we have to invest so that we can get there.
Absolutely, and you'll see as you exit towards the coffee later that there is a post-it station for highlighting what you think is the most needed action. And we already have some post-its highlighting the need for relationship building, trust, and empowerment. Thank you very much for that comment. Next.
Hi, Patrick Atwater with the California Data Collaborative, and Little Hack is really obvious, but going to where the intended audience is physically at, you know, walk a mile in their shoes, see the world as they see it, and food helps as well. Yeah.
We have some hungry audience members, I can tell. I concur. Hopefully the pop-ups will be quick before we break for lunch. Any other techniques folks are willing to share? Oh, yes.
Hi. My name is Dawn Henning, and I come from the city of New Haven in Connecticut. And I would just say who the messenger is can help with literacy. So we build green infrastructure. I work for the local government. Not that people don't like us, but we work with our nonprofit partners to build this. And one of the nonprofit partners works with previously incarcerated persons from the neighborhood to actually like build our green infrastructure out in the streets. So when people are walking by and they see people they know, their friends or cousins, they ask them, they talk to them, and there's like a sense of pride amongst workers building these, and they talk about what they do and why they're doing it. And I think that that message is much more well received than it coming from me.
Maybe
We
one
have
more.
one up front.
Hi, I'm Anna Henderson from Minnesota. I work for the governor, and one of the things that we deal with is a lot of non-point source pollution coming from our agricultural lands in rural areas. And what we have been doing to engage those communities and bring them in is that when state government puts together information, we then take it to those communities and give them full participation in editing the presentation of it and participating in the conversation of how we talk about it and what it means, so that they also own that information.
Great. Oh, one more. And while that happens, I'm going to confer whether we can have a break or not. Yeah? It's a yes. Okay, so please continue. Just keeping an eye out for y'all, you know, and myself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kalima Rose from Policy Link in Oakland, California. And we're a national advocacy organization that focuses on race and economic inclusion. And we've found it to be very powerful to form peer networks around water and climate resilience. And people really take ownership of doing peer learning with one another. And so we have gathered a caucus with support from the Kresge Foundation of frontline leaders who are working at that intersection, and they form themselves into working groups. And the information they share with one another makes all of their campaigns so much more powerful and effective. And so with their leadership, I think we're going to see very transformative things happening across the country.
Fantastic. The last question is, when you return home, what actions can you take to better connect information to action? And what actions might you take to make the information to action pipeline more inclusive, I would add? I know some of you have made commitments to the Global Climate Action Summit in general. If you want to share that as a specific action, that works as well. Anything you can do personally? Yes, we've got a couple of hands over here.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Martin Marani from Kenya, a teacher at the University of Nairobi. And I'm quite excited about the mention of having a database for us to address climate change. Maybe I share a little bit of what the challenge we have in Kenya about databases. Now, we have, in the water sector, we have many agencies working at different levels. And each of these agencies has collects data and builds their own database. Now, the interesting thing is that, or rather the sad thing is that these agencies do not collaborate, meaning that they have databases which may conflict, but yet they cannot cooperate to like agree on which data to use to make certain decisions about climate change. And so we are in that very complex situation. Each one collects their data and they claim this is the right data, which they're not willing to share with somebody else. And so how do we handle that kind of situation where we have agencies competing in terms of data, in terms of what to use for decision making? How do we do that? Is there an idea?
Are you asking if there's an idea from the participants?
Yeah.
And I want to make sure we're framing the question that Meredith just asked. And maybe if anyone has any ideas, they could offer to speak with you at the break.
Okay.
One action building off of that could be to compare the challenges of interoperability that I'm sure many of the people in the room face. If you've got time over lunch, happy to chat. We had a couple hands here in terms of specific actions that folks are excited about taking as next steps. Carol? Yeah. Carol's the mic person.
Oh,
sorry.
Carol?
Please introduce yourself. You're probably not a Carol.
I am not. I'm Tia from the California Water Efficiency Partnership, and we work with utilities across California on water conservation and efficiency. My background is actually community organizing and communications, and so this is particularly interesting to me, thinking about how do we take these, peer-to-peer learning opportunities, someone said go to where they're at. That's like the organizer idiom of you go to where the people are at. And how do you translate that to a lot of engineers that we work with? And engineers don't like being wrong. And a lot of times you're wrong, right? In how you think you should communicate something. And so one action that I would like to take going back is to continue to facilitate a safe space for people to try out outreach and communications that might not work so well, but facilitate the peer space where we can share what is working. And so maybe people fail less, but we continue to try and we continue to reach out to the public as much as we can.
That's a great point. And as an electrical engineer, I will just put out there that that safe space is very important no matter what background you come from. We get a second from Ken. Great. There were two more hands up here. No?
Hi, I'm Bevan, again from the Governor's Association. So I work on water policy, but we have a whole bunch of other divisions that work on health, economic development, and I work with the energy people, but it doesn't seem like we have a lot of cross-sector communication or collaboration, and I think that's how to get more stakeholders involved and to build more support. And as far as meeting people where they're at and getting peers to, getting information to them where they are. For the Governor's Association, since our people are all over the country, we like to pick amazing places like San Francisco, so everybody will come here, so thank you.
So your action is you're inviting all of these folks for the next convening, I hear.
Well, I'm going to start within our own organization and try to do some convening with different stakeholders from those areas. Yeah.
Great, fantastic. And so unfortunately, in order for us to get to lunch early, which is the new plan, we're going to have to wrap up. So if you have one quick summary of the action, I know you were waiting to share. Or if there's two quick actions before we...
Okay, Phoebe Seaton again with Leadership Council. One of an immediate action is we just convened right before this week, about 100 local climate leaders in San Joaquin Valley, and we're going to meet again. The next focus will be on the water climate link. The next action is I'd love to work with other leaders in the Climate Equity Summit and bring together local climate leaders from throughout the United States, at least, to start to have peer-to-peer learning amongst most impacted community leaders throughout the country.
Great, and the last word, the last action to share.
Oh boy, so July.
There's a whole Post-it wall full of actions, so you all can get your input in afterwards.
Okay, so I'll make this really quick. Jelon White-Newsom with the Kresge Foundation. Two things. I had a conversation with the Missions Investors Exchange yesterday, and I think bringing in those folks that are mission-related investors into this conversation is really important, so that's one action that I'm going to do. The second thing, I have the opportunity to work with a wonderful set of grantee partners, and we're coming together in October. And so one of the things, when we talk about equitable access to this space, there's a lot of people that aren't here that should be here, that represent low-income communities and communities of color. So we're going to make sure with the team that we have here that we're sharing what we're learning, context, resources, and information.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing.
Meredith, I'm just wondering, can you help just wrap up this activity? And also, I know one of the questions is, what do you do with those cards? So if you could let us all know.
Please, when you've got your cards filled out, pass them to the left. Stephanie will be continuing, there's Stephanie right there, to add your input to this wall. It looks like we might need another piece of paper at some point, and we'll be sharing this on social media and through the mailing list afterwards. Please continue to share your input. And next up,
well, thank you.
Oh, there you go.
It goes over to Wade.
There.
Thanks, Wade.
I would just say, first of all, thanks to Regina and Meredith and the panelists. Let's give them a hand. There was clearly a lot of thought that went into creating a session that was interactive, got a diversity of perspectives from around the world, and really intended to build energy, which I think it succeeded in. So we're going to do two quick things before lunch, and that relates to the two gentlemen standing in front of me. These guys are going to each provide an information pop-up. The idea is short, distilled, exciting sort of example to both inspire you and to provide ideas for your own in your own areas of practice. And then I'll just talk about what we're going to do for lunch and the rest of the day. So Drew.
Thank you. So Drew Atwater, I work in Molten Miguel Water District in South Orange County. Uniquely, we're 100% dependent on imported water. So all of our water, very energy intensive, comes from either the Western Sierras through the State Water Project or from the Colorado River Basin. We focused very actively on demand management, pricing, rebates, education, marketing, in order to help encourage our customers to be efficient. As part of that also, we've started through a collaborative effort to work across our watershed, a small coastal watershed in our service area. In California, we have different pieces of water spread across different institutions. So flood control, stormwater, water supply are all spread across different governmental agencies. So we have a little bit of institutional fragmentation. And so some of the themes of cooperation, sharing data, we've been taking those to action to help inform and collaborate across different areas. We signed a memorandum of understanding with our cities, our local county, some local environmental groups in order to share data, share resources, to align messaging, to help encourage customers to protect local creeks and streams by being efficient with their water usage and reducing their overwatering. Building on that too, so as a retail water agency, we read meters. We've deployed a smart meter network in order to encourage customers and provide more real-time data on their water usage. But we're looking to actually connect flow sensors throughout the watershed and salinity monitoring to have a live, real-time water budget for the whole watershed to better inform and target which areas are contributing to urban runoff, and also better inform and target opportunities for resource recovery through the watershed. It's a similar story to many agencies in California. We've reduced our water usage, and so our wastewater flows have decreased, and so we have about double the wastewater treatment capacity that we need. And so we're taking that as an opportunity to recover potentially urban and storm flows, connect it, but we need to have really good data in order to inform that, to not overwhelm those systems. And so first step, we've been collaborating, working across the watershed to collect all of that data, build real-time salt and water balances to potentially recover that water, reduce the carbon footprint of the agency by having a local water supply, and also working across institutions to share data and engage the public. So that's great.
Good morning, my name is Jason Morrison. I'm with the Pacific Institute. I'm going to talk about a free online platform that we developed under an agreement with the UN Global Compact and a corporate water stewardship initiative that we manage called the Sea Water Mandate. And the platform that I'm going to talk about is called the Water Action Hub. And it was initially launched in 2012. So some of you may be familiar with it, some of you may already be users of it, but I want to talk a little bit about some recent additions to the hub and also where we're going and how you might engage in this platform. So Martha summarized the morning session by having one of the key themes being you can't go it alone. And in fact, many people realize that when it comes to solving key water challenges in a basin, there's a real not only value proposition around partnership, but actually an imperative around collaborating in order to get the competencies that are necessary. So this platform is meant to connect organizations that share an interest but may not be aware that others are in a particular area or have a particular focus that they also care about. Sarah talked about their water questionnaire for CDP. Many companies that have gotten to the point where they diagnose their risk using whatever global risk assessment tool may be out there, like Aqueduct or the risk filter, will hotspot an area where they understand that water is an issue. And typically the first question that the company will ask is, who's doing what there? Who's already got stuff underway? Because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So this is the type of platform that would allow quickly on a geographic basis for an organization to figure out which organizations have either projects or prospective interest in working in a particular issue. So if Jan's doing work on nature-based solutions, source water protection projects, green infrastructure, that's part of the tagging system. So if I want to know what's going on in Peru or in Latin America, I can do the search and the algorithms will take up any organization or any project that's been tagged as doing that topic, right? So and what we've now done in the revamp of the hub is to align it better with the targets of Goal 6 of SDG, of the SDGs, and also the Sustainable Development Goal 13.1, and also other water-related goals such as the natural disaster mitigation strategy and sustainable ag. So what's new about the revamped system is what we call a smart notification system. So in essence, what you can do now is follow a particular organization or a particular topic. So if the interest that you have is on target 13.1 on climate adaptation and resilience, any new entry to the hub, whether you constrain it geographically to North America or California, or just globally, if you're interested in knowing what's happening when a new entry is made, it will alert you through an email notification so you can be aware of that. The idea here is that once you have the innovations happening and the collective actions forming, you want to be able to replicate and scale and build on what's already happening there. So this is meant to help unleash that trapped knowledge by letting you know where you can work with others on topics that you care about. We tailored the hub so that in California, it's now aligned to the goals of the governor's California Water Action Plan. So if you want to understand who's doing what and what projects are underway along the lines of those goals, you can search that and very quickly find out who you might be able to partner with on that front. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jason. So the power of an event or a convening like this is obviously the people who are coming together, and that's you guys. And we're going to move into a period when you have time to stretch, talk to each other, build relationships, share information and perspectives. A few things before we do. One is a lot of important information sharing took place this morning and will continue over the next day and a half. The contact information, the background, et cetera, of the folks in the room today is on the app that you can download very easily. So if you want to understand more about the speakers that you've heard from or find ways to connect after this two-day convening, please download the app. Over lunch, we have a pretty amazing interactive art installation called the Water Bar. And an artist named Shania Madison created this water bar, and it's literally a bar where you can go up and make friends with a bartender who will serve you different kinds of water. And so you should check it out. It's a pretty incredible experience, and it's sort of taken a life of its own. We'll hear from Shania after lunch on a panel, but take time to do that. It's in this open area. Let me thank Autodesk, obviously, for providing this space. This is a busy, crazy week in San Francisco with a whole lot of affiliated events, and Autodesk has been amazing in terms of providing this space, which is obviously great interactive space, very close to where a lot of us are staying for the week. On the note of a big, crazy week, our lunch is caught in protest traffic. The good news is that we have folks on the street actually raising awareness around these issues by protesting. The bad news is they're delaying our box lunch. So what we're going to do now, though, is take an hour and a half before we reconvene formally and really have time before 1:30 to spend time together here. Feel free to go outside and stretch. It's a beautiful day. The city's Embarcadero. Oh, sorry, 12:30. I didn't want to give you a 2.5-hour lunch. Debbie was having a panic attack here. So an hour and a half, but we have a beautiful Embarcadero right there across the street. That's great for walking. We anticipate having the lunches hopefully in a half an hour, 45 minutes. And then we'll convene at 12:30 for a really good set of discussions this afternoon with a break in the middle. If you happen to sneak out of here for whatever purpose, know that if you come back tomorrow at 7:30 for the Continental Breakfast or at 8, you will be alone. We are moving the party across the Embarcadero to the Exploratorium. So just know that day 2 of our water pavilion, as planned, is at the Exploratorium. And with that, please enjoy the company of each other, and we'll see you back here at 12:30. Thank you.